The title is the topic. Today I'm talking about carefully crafted language. I want to preface this by reading one paragraph from the latest update to the Tropes vs. Women in Video Games Kickstarter. Many of my previous videos were off the cuff and only half scripted. In this series, I have become much more intentional. Every sentence and every word is carefully considered and evaluated. There is nothing flippantly or casually stated. This can lead to hours of discussion about the accuracy of a particular term or rephrasing a single sentence until it is just right. Rather than small casual analysis, each trope video has ended up feeling like we are trying to put together a master's thesis in just a few months. I'll draw your attention to two pieces of this. Every word is carefully considered and evaluated. This can lead to hours of discussion. First off, a clip from Anita.
Let's try a thought experiment to see if we can create a hypothetical game concept of our own.
Since I have become proficient at unraveling the language in her videos, I want to do a thought experiment of how Anita and Jonathan McIntosh construct their arguments. Since Peach is Anita's flagship damsel in distress,
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress.
and since I like defending Princess Peach, I will be using her for this thought experiment.
Go, Peach!
You up for this, Princess Peach?
Yeah!
So let's start off with the introduction into the main Princess Peach section.
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress.
How do you feel about that description, Peach?
Sweet!
After all, Peach is probably the most famous damsel in distress. However, they are about to go into a careful deconstruction of Princess Peach and try to make us feel sorry for the treatment of damsels, and that is in part why they start off with Princess Peach. Now let me play that clip again and present my interpretation. Listen to the emphasis of how important she is.
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress.
Quintessential stock character. If they do enough to attack her treatment, that thought process can carry over into other damsels in distress.
Quintessential stock character.
The stock character implies she is the standard for all damsels. By destroying her image, they destroy the image of the damsel. How do you feel about what I said so far, Peach?
Oh.
Let's continue.
The ill-fated princess.
Ill-fated princess. They just introduced her as the stock character, which in and of itself isn't a bad description, just to follow it up with ill-fated princess.
Quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress. The ill-fated princess.
After the introduction, they go straight into the assault. Given all the games Peach is playable in versus the games she is a damsel in, I'd hardly call her ill-fated. However, Anita then follows it with this.
The ill-fated princess appears in 14 of the core Super Mario Bros. Platformer games.
Notice how she said core series? I just demonstrated Peach is playable in more games than she is a damsel in distress. By specifying core series, Anita is limiting the list to only games where she is kidnapped and not playable.
And she's kidnapped in 13 of them.
Kidnapped in 13 of them. Peach is in those 14 games, but kidnapped in 13.
14 of the core Super Mario Bros. Platformer games, and she's kidnapped in 13 of them.
Do you like the framing they put on you, Peach? By focusing on the core franchise, Anita set up a scenario where Peach is kidnapped in 13 of the 14 games she mentions, making her argument seem stronger mathematically. She then plays this. Mario saves Peach forever. Peach is in fact playable in more games than she is rescued, but being that Anita is talking about the core franchise, she just eliminated those other games if you play by her rules.
Studied extensively.
What about that loose end Super Mario Bros. 2? Now she needs to tie that loose end up. Anita has to make her arguments bulletproof.
The North American release of Super Mario Bros. 2 in 1988 remains the only game in the core series in which Peach is not kidnapped.
Notice how she said core series again?
Remains the only game in the core series
Just to say where she is not kidnapped.
in which Peach is not kidnapped.
Why is that even a talking point? If Peach is not kidnapped in that game, why mention that Peach is not kidnapped?
In which Peach is not kidnapped.
There is no purpose in mentioning that, other than it is a way to draw more sympathy for Peach in a game where she is, in fact, playable. And Anita does mention that.
And also the only game in which she's a playable character.
The only game where she is playable. By using the core franchise nonsense, it would in fact make it the only game she allows for discussion where Peach is actually playable.
Remains the only game in the core series, and also the only game in which she's a playable character.
Well, Peach, how do you like your framing so far? Yeah, it kinda sucks when you take what is probably the most playable damsel in distress in history just to craft the scenario so we are now supposed to feel sorry for Princess Peach.
Though it should be noted, it wasn't originally created to be a Mario game at all. The game was originally released in Japan under a completely different title called Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which roughly translates to Dream Factory Heart-Pounding Panic.
Anita is technically right here, so I have no criticism.
Nintendo of America thought that the original Japanese release of Super Mario Bros. 2 was too difficult and too similar to the first game, so they reskinned and redesigned Doki Doki Panic to star Mario and Luigi instead. However, the Japanese game already had 4 playable characters.
I didn't check those statements, but they sound factual. Again, I don't actually have any complaints here.
So the designers opted to include Toad and the princess to fill the 2 remaining slots, building directly on top of the pre-existing character models.
Once again, more facts. What is there to complain about? When she just states facts, I can't complain.
So really, if we're honest, Peach is kinda accidentally playable in this one.
Now she is getting back to the carefully crafted language. Let's replay that with an edit.
So really, if we're honest, Toad is kinda accidentally playable in this one.
One could argue that Toad is also accidentally playable in this one, but that narrative doesn't help to put Peach in enough of a negative light. Anita will leave out facts and details if they make her arguments weaker.
Studied extensively. Still, she had the awesome ability to float for short distances, which came in really handy, especially in the ice levels.
So we have something positive going. Anita does throw in some positives here and there.
But remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
However, I will point out with the scenario Anita has set up with the core franchise, it allows her to be more critical of games than enjoy the games.
Sadly, Peach has never been a playable character again in the main franchise.
And back to the core franchise nonsense. After saying some nice things about Super Mario Bros. 2, she is back to attacking the treatment of Princess Peach. Because Anita has to exclude any potential counter-arguments.
Even with newer games that feature 4-player options like the new Super Mario Bros. Wii and Wii U, the princess is still excluded from the action. She's been replaced with another Toad instead, as to allow Nintendo to force her back into the damsel role again and again.
I already covered the issues I have with that segment in my first Damsel in Distress review, so I won't rehash it here. However, Peach is still playable in a lot of games, so Anita will at least acknowledge their existence so no one can accuse her of lazy research.
Studied extensively. Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs such as the Mario Party, Mario Sports, and Mario Kart series, as well as the Super Smash Bros. Nintendo Universe crossover fighting games.
For being playable in so many games, that actually sounds good considering her origins are that of a damsel in distress. How do you feel about that, Peach?
Yahoo!
Notice this one line, though.
Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs.
They are spin-offs, but Mario's origins predate the core franchise.
And Jumpman became a certain very famous plumber.
So why does she chain Mario from the Donkey Kong games, but then stop chaining Peach at the spin-offs where she is playable? It really isn't fair to trace lines as far back and forward as you want and cut it off when it doesn't support your arguments. But then again, these are Anita's rules. Is that really fair? I think Peach is just as confused as I am. However, since Anita did mention them, she needs to eliminate them as counter-arguments.
However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside of the core Super Mario series of platformers.
When you let Anita set the rules, being the core franchise nonsense, you are letting her control the narrative. This rule is hers, not mine. Despite her little technicality, she then says this.
She is the star of only one adventure, and we'll get to that a little later.
Anita just excluded every other game Peach is playable in with the core franchise nonsense.
However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside of the core Super Mario series of platformers.
Just to turn around and mention she'll be talking about one that falls outside the core franchise.
She is the star of only one adventure, and we'll get to that a little later.
And what was the criteria for talking about that game?
She is the star.
She is the star. By wording it that way, since that is the only game where Peach is a star to my knowledge, it allows Anita to alter the rules in her favor. She has to say the star of one adventure so she can exclude other games where Peach is playable but not the star.
Studied extensively.
Anita wanted to cover that game to make the implications of a PMS joke. However, since Peach is playable in that game, and Anita doesn't want to talk about other games where Peach is playable, she uses the star of one adventure line. Now one could argue that Super Princess Peach is not a typical spin-off, but neither is Super Smash Bros. Since that is actually a crossover game.
As well as the Super Smash Bros. Nintendo Universe crossover fighting games.
So why does Anita set all these little rules for what does and does not count? It is so she can control the narrative. She can frame her arguments however she wants and set up a bulletproof scenario where you can't defeat her if you play by her rules. Now watch this clip that comes later on where Anita references Princess Peach and ask yourself, how valid would these talking points be if Anita didn't lay down the criteria she did for Princess Peach?
So for example, we can think of the Super Mario franchise as a grand game being played between Mario and Bowser, and Princess Peach's role is essentially that of the ball. The two men are tossing her back and forth over the course of the main series, each trying to keep and take possession of the damsel ball.
She said the main series.
Over the course of the main series,
she had to carefully craft her little set of rules, because if you look at every game where Peach is playable, it isn't as bad as Anita frames it. Having said that, I want to play the first section from beginning to end. With everything I just said, as this section plays, ask yourself how easy it is to believe all her arguments when you don't understand how she constructs them.
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress. The ill-fated princess appears in 14 of the core Super Mario Bros. Platformer games, and she's kidnapped in 13 of them. The North American release of Super Mario Bros. 2 in 1988 remains the only game in the core series in which Peach is not kidnapped, and also the only game in which she's a playable character. Though it should be noted, it wasn't originally created to be a Mario game at all. The game was originally released in Japan under a completely different title called Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which roughly translates to Dream Factory Heart-Pounding Panic. Nintendo of America thought that the original Japanese release of Super Mario Bros. 2 was too difficult and too similar to the first game, so they reskinned and redesigned Doki Doki Panic to star Mario and Luigi instead. However, the Japanese game already had 4 playable characters, so the designers opted to include Toad and the Princess to fill the 2 remaining slots, building directly on top of the pre-existing character models. So really, if we're honest, Peach is kinda accidentally playable in this one. Still, she had the awesome ability to float for short distances, which came in really handy, especially in the ice levels. Sadly, Peach has never been a playable character again in the main franchise. Even with newer games that feature 4-player options like the new Super Mario Bros. Wii and Wii U, the princess is still excluded from the action. She's been replaced with another Toad instead, as to allow Nintendo to force her back into the damsel role again and again. Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs such as the Mario Party, Mario Sports, and Mario Kart series, as well as the Super Smash Bros. Nintendo Universe crossover fighting games. However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside of the core Super Mario series of platformers. She is the star of only one adventure, and we'll get to that a little later.
That section clocks in at about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. How long do you think it took them to put that section together? That one section could have taken hours to put together. And even after all that, they have to think of every potential counter-argument and craft it in a way to make it bulletproof. They also have to spend that much more time making it so you can't use their own arguments against them.
Studied extensively.
And they have over an hour of damsel in distress videos that are constructed this way. Just imagine how long they were spending on how to construct their arguments rather than doing any real research. Around 6 months into their project, they only had 142 games documented. They were literally sitting around making their talking points rather than doing any real research, but that isn't what Anita was paid to do.
Each video in this new series will be between 10 and 20 minutes long, with well-researched, in-depth analysis. As you might imagine, this project requires an enormous amount of research, because I'm not just looking at a handful of games or just the worst offenders, but at hundreds of games and hundreds of different characters across all genres. This is an incredibly ambitious project because of the scope and scale of the research and production involved. So please donate any amount you can to bring this video series to life.
Anita was paid to do research, not convince people with her arguments based on the lack of evidence. If Anita only listed 142 games around 6 months after her Kickstarter, what was she doing with that $158,000? It doesn't take that much money to sit around talking all day. Even her original asking amount of $6,000, it doesn't cost that much. And considering how many games they had documented by the time Damsel in Distress Part 3 was done, they were literally paid $158,000 to sit around and BS for over half a year.
Studied extensively.
I'll note the clip they started their first video with.
Mario! Ah! Help!
They started their first video with Princess Peach asking for help. And they laid down an assault on her treatment by excluding any games that challenged their claims. In essence, they wanted to destroy the image of Peach so we would feel sorry for her. However, being that Peach is playable in so many games, I'd actually say she has been treated rather fair.
Hacha!
So Peach, how did you like being my partner for this video?
This is fun!
It is indeed fun. If you like this video, I have a playlist tackling Anita Keesian and her work, and encourage you to check it out. It also includes reviews of her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
I get a lot of support from people who really like my videos, and they've even been used as educational tools in classrooms. Educational tools.
I leave my audience with one question.
Oh, did I win?